Hello, hello. How's everyone doing? Just gonna wait a little bit. Usually, Adi will be here, but I don't see him in the chat right now. So we're gonna wait a couple minutes, see if any stragglers show up. Oh, sweet. Alright. Looks like people can hear me. Now they can see me. Excellent. So it's good to be seen as well as heard. Though I suppose for my class, being heard is a little bit more important in the long run. As we recall, there's Adi. Last week I wasn't able to have my class, but 2 weeks ago we discussed the last pair was Yeshua ben Parahia and Nitai Ha'arbeli. And we'll be moving into the next pair in this class. Hopefully we'll be able to get 2 pairs out of the way, leading up to Hillel and Shammai for next week, the super famous pair. Alright, we've got a good little crew going right now. Just dive into the class. So the third pair were Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shetah. As usual, I'm going to address the era they lived in before discussing their opinions and rulings, as the lifestyle that they're leading, the events around them will affect how they rule and what they think of the larger Jewish world. The previous pair were active during the reign of Yochanan Hyrcanus, who died in 104 BCE. He was succeeded by his firstborn son, Aristobulus, who killed his mother and one of his brothers, and further imprisoned all of his other brothers. This was a key strategy for securing the power vacuum, which followed someone as powerful as his father. As we recall, Yochanan Hyrcanus actively conquered much of the internal region of Greater Israel, taking over the Edomite region and enslaving various Nabateans across the Jordan. Very powerful person. Supposedly, there's a lot of statements saying that Aristobulus' wife did a lot of the political maneuvering, but it's also likely that he himself sought to come into power. I very much doubt he would have moved against his brothers just because his wife said so. There's some confusion as to whether his wife was the one and same with the later Queen Salome Alexandra, or merely if they had a similar name. According to Josephus, he was the first Hasmonean to take on the actual title of king. So this is, again, the previous pair. We dealt with the Hasmoneans attempting to consolidate power to a single position with the priesthood and the and kind of a kingship, more like a governorship. So now they're actually taking on the title of king, and this was drawing a lot of ire from the sages. This is also when the term Sanhedrin, which is based off a Greek word, actually came into use to refer to the community that the pairs were ruling over. However, Aristobulus quickly went insane and died, either of remorse, poison, or disease. We're not really sure. Could have been any of those. Alexander Yanai, the true Yanai, whose name would later be used in Midrashim as an appellation for all cruel Jewish leaders, came into power and either married Aristobulus' wife before being anointed high priest, or married the similarly named Salome Alexandra. I'm going to address her personality later, as when she is reigning, things are a bit different. So King Alexander Yanai would reign until 76 BCE, so for 25 years, during which he would further expand the borders of Judean dominance, especially in regards to warring against the remnants of the Seleucids and fighting against the Nabatean kingdom to the east of the Jordan, which had actually previously aided the Hasmoneans in their initial revolt against Seleucid control. He also actively participated in Ptolemaic internal affairs. If you remember, the Ptolemies are the ones in charge of Egypt at the time. They're also a Hellenic group. Later, the Nabatean king Obadas invaded Judea and defeated Alexander Yanai in combat. Upon returning to Jerusalem, it seems he held himself as a Sadducee and refused to do the water pouring ritual on the holiday Sukkot. The water pouring ritual was a thing of debate between the Sadducees and the Pharisees or the sages. Essentially, on Sukkot, there's a period where the sages ruled that you actually pour water on the altar itself. The Sadducees were very much against this. They didn't believe that this was a valid sacrifice or offering, and so Sadducees would try to pour it off, like onto the ground or onto their feet before it could reach the altar. Apparently, he did this, and this, together with general dissatisfaction with his warmongering, sparked a civil war. Predominantly Pharisaic Jewish rebels were aided actually by the Seleucid king Demetrius III Eucharius. They were actually quite successful and forced Yanai into hiding. These same rebels, however, they eventually decided against loyalty to a foreign power, especially one that they'd thrown the shackles off of only a few centuries earlier, and and turned against the Seleucids, which led to Alexander Yanai defeating them and finally winning. I'm going to address the various literature surrounding the colorful kind of character of King Yanai. Remember, a lot of it is layered with midrashim, which are not to be taken literally. The Jerusalem Talmud tends to balance criticism of King Yanai with praise, giving a lot more of a nuanced character, a little bit more realistic. While the Babylonian Talmud, to quote Yehoshua Ephron, depicts an image of a notorious dictator who despises the sages, murders rabbis, and is wicked and heartless. Ironically, documents from the Qumran sect, who themselves tended to dislike the sages, actually usually agree with the Babylonian depiction. So let's review some of these stories. First of all, there's Kiddushin, which some contend refers to Yohanan Hyrcanus, and others say does refer to Alexander Yanai. Because remember, his name ends up being used so it says here, it once happened that King Yanai went to Gohalit in the wilderness and captured 60 cities there. When he returned, he celebrated his victory and summoned all the sages, saying to them, when our forefathers built the temple, they ate malos, which is salty dishes, so too should we eat salty dishes in memory of our forefathers. The king and the sages sat at golden tables and ate. An evil, worthless scoffer named Eleazar ben Poira told Yanai, King Yanai, the Pharisees are plotting against you. What then shall I do? He asked. Test them by the cis, which is a golden plate on the forehead, if you remember the priestly garments, between your eyes. So he tested them by the golden plate between his eyes. Now an elder named Yehuda, son of Gedidiah, was present there, said to King Yanai, O King Yanai, let the royal crown suffice, and leave that priestly crown to the seat of Aaron. For it was rumored that his mother had been imprisoned in Moadim, and the charge was investigated but never sustained. And the sages of Israel departed in anger. Then Eleazar ben Poira said to King Yanai, O King Yanai, That is the law for even the most humble man in Israel. But you are a king and the high priest. Shall that be the law for you too? Then what shall I do? If you take my advice, trample them down. But what shall happen with the Torah? Said King Yanai. Behold, it is rolled up and lying in the corner. Whoever wishes to study, let him go and study. Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzhak said, immediately a spirit of heresy was instilled into him, for he should have replied, that is well for the written law, but what of the oral law? Straightway the evil burst forth from Eleazar, son of Porira. All the sages of Israel massacred, the world was desolate, until Shimon ben Shetach came and restored the Torah to its pristine stature. It's a pretty brutal opinion of him there. Now, let's address this massacre of the sages. Both scrolls from Qumran and the references in Josephus attest this to his having executed rebels, which may have included many sages. As I said, the Pharisees tended to actually support the revolt against him. A multitude clearly fled the country rather than face his wrath, especially to Alexandria in Egypt. A strange illustration of his character is found in the Babylonian Berachot. So, this one gives kind of a weird story about him. In it, it says, King Yanai and his queen were eating together, and since he had killed the rabbis, there was no one left to say grace for them. Birkan Hamazon. He said to his wife, who can bring us someone to say grace for us? She said to him, swear to me that if I bring you someone, you will not harm him. He swore to her, and she brought Shimon ben Shetach, her brother. She placed him between her husband and herself. Look at the honor bestowed upon you, said the king. Shimon replied, it is not you who honors me, but the Torah that honors me. As is written, exalt her and she will uplift you. She will honor you when you embrace her. Yanai said to her, you see that he does not recognize any authority. They gave him a cup of wine over which to say grace. He said, how shall I say grace? Shall I say, blessed is he of whose sustenance Yanai and his companions have eaten? So he drank that cup, and they gave him another, and he said grace over it. So, it's a little bit of a strange story. First of all, if he hates the sages so much, and he's such a heretic, why does he care about saying grace? To be fair, in those days, you were kind of defined by your culture as well. So he was still a Jewish king, even if he was at odds with other Jews. That might be part of it. There's a lot of Midrashim that actually have strange versions of that, about terrible people that care about particular laws. But we'll find a little bit more enlightenment, I think, in the story of the Jerusalem Talmud's parallel tale. So, we've got several events that lead up to this dinner in this one. It was taught 300 poor Nazarites, which are the people who took a vow not to cut their hair or consume grape products, came to Israel in the days of Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach upon completion of their Nazarite period. They could not afford to bring the required sacrifices. For 150 of them he found an opening with which to release them from their vows. In other words, he found that their vows were invalid, and therefore they didn't have to give the sacrifices because they didn't have to be a Nazarite. And for the other 150, he did not find an opening, so they were bound by their oath. He came to Yanai the king and told him, there are 300 Nazarites here. They need 900 offerings, but they cannot afford them. Said Yanai, rather than having them bring these offerings, you give half at your expense, and I will give half at mine. Thereupon Yanai sent him 450 offerings. A talebearer went to the king and told him, Shimon ben Shetach gave nothing of his own. King Yanai heard and was enraged, and Shimon ben Shetach became frightened and fled for his life. So in this one we see, even if he massacred some sages, Shimon had not been part of this, and in fact his anger came from a very different situation in which he felt that Shimon had robbed him. The story continues. After some time, dignitaries from the Persian kingdom came to visit King Yanai. When they sat, they told Yanai, "Remember that there is an elderly man here who would say words of wisdom before us." Yanai related to them what had transpired, but they said, "Nevertheless, send for him and bring him." Yanai sent for him, and he gave him a sign that he would not harm him. Shimon ben Shetach came and sat between the king and the queen. Yanai said to him, "Why did you trick me?" Shimon ben Shetach responded, "I did not trick you, for I indeed provided for the Nazarites just as you did. You provided for half of the Nazarites from your money, while I provided for half of them with my knowledge of the Torah. As it is written, one who sits in the share of wisdom is as one who sits in the share of money." Sorry, instead of share, that should read shade. Yanai said to him, "Why then did you flee?" He replied to him, "I heard that my master, the king, was angry with me, and wished to fulfill the following verse. Hide for a moment until anger passes." Yanai then recited, regarding Shimon, the verse, "And the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of its possessors." Yanai asked him, "And why do you sit between the king and the queen?" He responded, "In the book of Ben Sira it is written, 'Exalt her,' that is the Torah, and she will uplift you. Between nobles she will seat you." Yanai then said to the servants, "Give him a cup of wine of which to make the blessing." Shimon ben Shetach took the cup and said, "Let us make a blessing for the food that Yanai and his friends have eaten." Yanai said to him, "Even now you persist, mocking me in my very presence." Shimon ben Shetach responded, "But what then shall I say? Let us make a blessing for the food that we have not eaten?" Yanai said to his servants, "Give him food to eat." He ate, and then he said, "Let us make a blessing for the food we have eaten." So that one's a lot more compelling, more realistic. So you notice in the Babylonian tradition, Yanai's wife and the queen is Shimon's sister, whereas there's no mention of this, and it seems he doesn't seem to know her at all, really, in the Jerusalem one. Going to address her role as sister or not as sister later during her own segment. The Persians present were actually very important diplomats, which is part of the reason why even Shimon in disgrace could be brought back. They're members of the Parthian Empire. They defeated the Seleucids in a big battle in 139 BCE during the reign of Simeon, the Hasmonean, and the previous pair, Yeshua ben Parahia and Nitai Ha'abeli. So these are very important people because keeping on good terms with the Parthians helped keep the Seleucids down, and they do not want to make these people angry. Okay. And we also find in Megillat Ta'anit, which is a text of days to fast and to rejoice, on the 28th of Tevet, Sanhedrin sat in session. Because the Sanhedrin was full of Sadducees, King Yanai and Queen Shalom Sion were seated there, and no other sages of Israel sat with them other than Shimon ben Shetach. They asked for answers and legal rulings, but were unable to substantiate their answers with verses from the Torah. Shimon ben Shetach said to them, "All those who are able to bring proof from the Torah are eligible to sit on the Sanhedrin." One day a case came before them, and there was no one able to bring proof from the Torah, other than one person who argued with him, and said to him, "Give me until tomorrow, and I will return." They gave him the time. He returned home and sat and studied, but was unable to find an answer from the Torah. Next day he was ashamed to come sit on the Sanhedrin, and Shimon ben Shetach replaced him with one of the students. He said to them, "A Sanhedrin cannot be less than 71. And he did this with every day until all of them had been removed, and the Sanhedrin of Israel sat again. On that day the Sanhedrin was finally rid of the Sadducees, and they made a festive day. So it seems whatever issues King Yanai had with the sages in the past may have subsided at the time of this story, particularly as his wife would rule as queen after him, and she was actually in favor of the sages, as well as being close to Shimon ben Shetach. During this time is likely when Shimon ben Shetach sent his famous message to Yeshua ben Parahia. Since it's been a while since last class, I'll remind you guys that Yeshua ben Parahia fled to Alexandria with his supposed disciple Jesus, though Again, not the actual Jesus of the New Testament, but a parallel tale in the Jerusalem Talmud places it actually referring to Yehuda ben Tabai, the other pair living at the time as him, which is very interesting. Yeah. They both fled to Alexandria. It's also possible that Yehuda ben Tabai would have gone to Alexandria as they were students of Yeshua ben Parachia. So Parachia may have fled to Alexandria in the previous generation during persecutions and remained there, and Yehuda ben Tabai may have followed him during the persecutions of Yanai, though there are also possibly other reasons, and perhaps Yeshua ben Parachia passed away. Who knows? It's hard to track down exact information on figures sometimes. Following the reestablishment of Pharisaic power in the Sanhedrin and King Yanai's demise in 76 BCE, his wife Queen Salome Alexandra, or Shalom Sion, ruled until 67 BCE. If she had in fact been Aristobulus' wife prior, then she had been a political powerhouse even before King Yanai came in. Many scholars suspect this to be unlikely, but it's clear she was important from early on. It's pretty likely that she managed to protect the lost sages, such as Shimon ben Shetach, from Yanai's ire, and likely ran the country on his way on his numerous campaigns. Unlike her unpopular husband, she avoided foreign wars and focused on domestic issues. Though the Babylonian tradition maintains that she was the sister of Shimon ben Shetach, the Jerusalem Talmud doesn't seem to insist on this, and many scholars question it. This personally causes me to think that if she wasn't, then the more conservative Amoraim and the Babylonian Talmud were uncomfortable with Shimon and she having such a close relationship without some kinship to tie them together. So remember, it's not like today where men and women could just be friends, really. So, in any case, her rule is kind of seen as an idyllic co-rule with Shimon ben Shetach. It's a little description they have of it. In some of the Sifra, it says, "Then I will give you rain in the seasons, on the nights of the Shabbat. It happened in the days of Shimon ben Shetach and Queen Shalom Sion that rained from Friday night to Friday night on a weekly basis, so that the grains of wheat grew as large as beans, the grains of barley were like olive stones, and the lentils were like golden dinarim. The sages made a bundle of them and left some behind for future generations." So she was seen as a great... The video's not working, okay. Don't know what to do about that. As long as people can keep hearing me, I guess I can keep running class. So Shalom Sion was seen as a great leader as opposed to her kind of back and forth husband. He'd switch between being beneficial to being quite terrible. Either way, he obviously drained the economy with all of his wars. Oh, the video's fine. She just wasn't able to see it herself, or himself, and actually no. Unlike the prior pairs, we actually have plenty of information on these two, particularly of Shimon ben Shetach. We're finally at a point in the characters where we're not just guessing off of minor things that Moraim and others say about them, which is really exciting. We'll review their statements in Pirkei Avot. So, Yehuda ben Tabai said, "Do not conduct yourselves like the lawyers, and when the litigants stand before you, consider them as wicked men. But when they depart, consider them as innocent, as soon as they have accepted the judgment." And Shimon ben Shetach said, "Examine the witnesses thoroughly, and be cautious in your words, lest they learn from them to deceive." In a time of civil disorder, war, and strife, we see them both focusing on their positions as judges and the legal system. Of course, they are also active political participants and effectively work the system to gain the upper hand. So these two were not your quiet yeshiva boys. These were men who understood that they wielded immense power and in turn had responsibilities. Now, up until this point, the first of the named pair was the Nasi, and the second the Av Beit Din. But there seems to be confusion in this matter for this particular pair. We do see Shimon ben Shetach as definitely being the representative of the royal court, a position typically reserved for the Nasi. However, this may have been a condition of his personal connection to the queen, giving him kind of a better footing when he visited the royalty. The main dispute seems to be between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda and the Tosefta. We'll review some of their stuff there. So in Hagiga, it says, the three authorities from the earlier pairs who ruled not to lay on hands, and two authorities of the later pairs who ruled to lay on hands were the Nasi. Those second to them were Av Beit Din. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, Shimon ben Shetach was the Nasi, Yehuda ben Tabai was the head of the court. The Jerusalem Talmud actually addresses where the nature of this dispute arises from. So, in their version of Hagiga, it brings up, we have taught, Yehuda ben Tabai was the Nasi, and Shimon ben Shetach was the Av Beit Din. Some teach it vice versa. He who says Yehuda ben Tabai was the Nasi finds support from the incident of Alexandria. He who says Shimon ben Shetach was the Nasi finds support from the incident in Ashkelon. So, for the incident of Alexandria, the men of Jerusalem wanted to appoint Yehuda ben Tabai as the Nasi in Jerusalem. He fled and went to Alexandria. The men of Jerusalem wrote, From Jerusalem the great to Alexandria the small, how long will my betrothed dwell with you while I am miserable on his account? Which is similar to the words that Shimon supposedly said to his teacher, who was also in Alexandria, according to the Babylonian tradition. So it seems there are two divergent traditions against who fled to Alexandria and who is the teacher of that heretic again. It's definitely certain that Yehuda ben Tabai had fled to Alexandria at some point, and it would make a lot of sense for Shimon ben Shetach to attempt to summon back his friend when the coup in the Sanhedrin had been completed, when they overturned the Sadducees' control. I believe that's likely Yehuda ben Tabai had been the Nasi, and he had tried to escape King Yanai's executions when he was put into this position because he didn't have the same favor protecting him from the queen, which protected Shimon ben Shetach. So in this capacity, Shimon ben Shetach acted as Nasi in Yehuda ben Tabai's absence, which is actually one of the duties of the Av Beit Din. Further, there's an exchange in the Tosefta of Sanhedrin, which shows Yehuda ben Tabai as being the Nasi, but giving it into Shimon ben Shetach's superior reasoning. It doesn't outwardly say he is the Nasi, but I'll show you kind of what happens and how I think that Yehuda had been in power and he ended up giving over the legal ruling to Shimon. The witnesses are never declared to be perjurers before the trial is over. They are not flogged, nor do they pay compensation, nor are they put to death on account of their perjury until the trial is over. A single witness is never declared a perjurer until both witnesses are found to be perjurers, and is not flogged until both are flogged, and is not put to death until both are put to death. Is not required to pay compensation until both are required to pay. Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai said, May I not see consolation if I did not put to death a single perjured witness as a demonstration against the position of the Boethusians, who stated that a perjured witness could not be put to death until after the accused had been executed. Shimon Shetach said to him, May I not see consolation if you have not shed innocent blood? For the Torah has said, On the testimony of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall that is to die be put to death. Sorry, messed up there. Just as the witnesses must be 2, so too the witnesses who are proved to be perjured must be 2. At that moment, Yehuda ben Tabai agreed never to give a legal ruling except on the authority of Shimon ben Shetach. So we see it looks like Yehuda ben Tabai was the Nasi, and he gave that kind of power over when Shimon proved him wrong on an issue of killing a perjured witness, which by Shimon's statement makes Yehuda ben Tabai a murderer, actually. In fact, Yehuda ben Tabai was so filled with remorse for the person he had evidently executed wrongly that he is said to have gone and prostrated himself in the grave of the man for the rest of his days, obviously excluding when he's in Alexandria, I assume. So while Yehuda ben Tabai seems to be the more prudent one, willing to back away from a fight in both physical and spiritual realms, Shimon ben Shetach is always at the forefront. During his tenure as Nasi, or acting as Nasi, he executed 80 witches from a single town. The entire story is pretty mysterious, and no one, even the sages who followed it, are certain of the veracity of it. In the Babylonian Talmud, it shows up as part of Rabbi Eliezer's prohibition against the Sanhedrin executing more than one person. Then the Jerusalem Talmud, he somehow uses mystical powers to determine their guilt, and it's a kind of an extra legal situation that arises. This is the incident that they referred to earlier when they said that Yehuda ben Tabai was the Nasi based in the tradition of Alexandria, and that Shimon ben Shetach was the Nasi based in the tradition of Ashkelon, because only as a Nasi could he have done what he did to these witches. This incident may have caused a terrible situation, which you find in the Sanhedrin of the Jerusalem Talmud. So it says, Shimon ben Shetach's hands were heated. That's to mean he was quick to execute those condemned to death. A group of scoffers came and said, "Let us conspire against him by testifying against his son and have him executed." They testified against him, and he was tried and condemned to death. When he went forth to be executed, they said to him, "My lord, we lied." His father wanted to bring him back, that is to say, nullify the verdict. His son said to him, "Father, if you sought to bring salvation by your hand, make me into the threshold." Though the text remains unclear on whether his son was actually executed, the story seems to suggest that he did cause the execution of his son by perjured witnesses. So this explains in Pirkei Avot Shimon ben Shetach's obsession with cross-examination of witnesses. He lost his own son for not paying enough attention. Despite this, he is also known for being exceedingly fair. We see this in a story from Sanhedrin, again, where Shimon ben Shetach says, "May I not see consolation if I did not see someone run after his fellow with a sword in his hand? And the pursued man went before him into a ruin. The pursuer ran in after him, and then I came in right after him and found the victim slain, with a knife in the hand of the murderer, dripping blood. I said to him, 'Evil one, who killed this person?' May I not see consolation if I did not see him run in there? Either you killed him or I did. But what can I do? For your case is not handed over to me. For the Torah said, 'On the testimony of 2 witnesses, or on the testimony of 3 witnesses, shall a person be put to death.' However, he who knows the thoughts of man will exact punishment from that man. He did not move from that spot until a snake bit him and he died." The person who bit him, the person being bitten being the murderer. So he's being exceedingly fair because he can't even bring this man to trial. There's only one witness. Even though he's the Nasi, he wants to be fair. Another thing showing how fair he was comes from Bava Messiah. Shimon ben Shetach dealt in flax to support himself. His student said to him, "Rabbi, remove this work from you, and we shall buy an ass for you. You will not have to work so much." They went and bought an ass from a Saracen. A pearl was hanging on it. They came and told him, "From now on you don't have to work anymore." He asked them why. They told him, "We bought from you an ass from a Saracen, and hanging on it was a pearl." He said to them, "Did his master know about it?" They told him, "No." So he said to them, "Go and return. Do you think that Shimon ben Shetach is a barbarian?" In another, it's Shimon himself who purchases the same ass in Devarim Rabbah. The blessing of God brings wealth. This story begins. Shimon ben Shetach replied, "I purchased an ass, but I did not purchase a precious stone." So he went and returned to the Ishmaelite, and the latter exclaimed of him, "Blessed be the Lord, God of Shimon ben Shetach." So again, he's exceedingly fair, despite his apparent heated hands. He is also credited with 3 major enactments. Shimon ben Shetach in Ketubot was enacted 3 regulations: that a man may do business with the marriage contract of his wife, that children should go to school, and that glassware is susceptible to impurity. Though the first pair, Yosef ben Yoezer and Yosef ben Yohanan, had already enacted the issue of glassware. Perhaps this was a reenactment due to loss of tradition during the persecutions. Others maintain this really refers to new decrees concerning copper, which supplemented the already existing glassware decree, though I don't see that in the text itself. Concerning what he means of the ketubah, the marriage document being used in business, we see further enlightenment in Tractate Ketubot. Rabbi Yehuda stated, "At first they used to give merely a written undertaking in respect to ketubah of a virgin for 200 zuzim, in respect to widow for a mana. Consequently, they grew old and could not take any wives. Shimon ben Shetach took the initiative and ordained that all the property of a husband would be pledged to the ketubah of his wife. So it was also taught elsewhere. At first, they used to give merely a written undertaking in respect of the ketubah of a virgin for 200 zuzim, in respect of a widow for a mana. Consequently, they grew old and could not take any wives. Then ordained that the amount of the ketubah was to be deposited in the wife's father's house. At any time, however, when the husband was angry with her, you used to tell her, 'Go get your ketubah.' It is therefore ordained that the amount of the ketubah was to be deposited in the house of her father-in-law. Wealthy women converted it into silver or gold baskets, while poor women converted it into brass tubs. Still, whenever the husband had occasion to be angry with his wife, he would go to say to her, 'Take your ketubah and go.' It was then that Shimon ben Shetach decreed that the husband must insert the pledging clause, and all my property is pledged to ketubah." Rabbi Saul Lieberman kind of explains further. It was difficult for them to spend 200 zuzim for the sake of marrying a woman. Because they don't normally marry adult women, the men would belong to her father, and the husband would have no profit from it. They therefore amended the arrangement so the ketubah would be deposited in the wife's father's house, for the wife's benefit, or she to die thereafter, her sons would inherit from her. The problem was that when the husband was angry, he would say, "Take your ketubah and leave." Hence they enacted a 3rd decree, ordering her to leave the ketubah in her father-in-law's house, until Shimon ben Shetach made a decree making the ketubah a source for negotiation. And he would write, "All my property is pledged to ketubah." That was a way to empower women and allow them to have kind of an independent wealth and stop the husband from just divorcing her on a whim, which apparently are problems. So remember, the document that we have as a ketubah today is written out in Aramaic, but it follows the sages added on multiple layers, requiring more and more commitments from the husband. Technically speaking, all I have to do to obtain myself a wife is make a contract between her and her family. So I could just go up to a woman and say, "I want to marry you for X amount. I'll pay your family $200. This will be your dowry, essentially." And whenever I got upset at her, I would tell her, "Go get your ketubah," she'd physically go grab these $200 and I'd kick her out. However, if he pledges all of his property to the ketubah, he's less likely to do these in acts of rage, and also it allows for both the husband and the wife to have a position of power. You guys need me to explain that a bit more, or? I see we have some questions in the chat about it. Yes, as Adi points out, gave him a little to think about. Gabriel asks, is this automatic when the dowry is presented? I'm not sure what is automatic. The ketubah itself is also a written document. It's a contract. Today it has a standardized form, but in the past it didn't used to. And so essentially these enactments by the sages were to make sure that everyone had certain things that they had to apply to the ketubah. Otherwise, you had richer families taking advantage of poorer families, and also apparently no one was ever getting married because since a lot of times they would go to a family and they'd find a woman who's not yet bat mitzvah, she wasn't yet a woman. They would tell the family, I would like to marry your daughter when she comes of age. So the ketubah amounts technically went to her family. And if they invested it or did things like that, then it wouldn't necessarily come back to the wife when she grew old enough. Which, just to point out, arranged marriages in Judaism are a little bit different. She, once she reached womanhood, could actually refuse, even though her family had already made the commitment. Important note. Gabriel says, automatic means does the transfer of money to ensure the relationship is a solid one automatically give rights to the wife. The wife automatically does receive these funds, unless in the situation I was talking about where her family received it because she was a minor, which was part of the issue that they are also enacting against. That way she had more authority. Oh, my cam went to sleep. There we go. Any other questions about the ketubah? Okay. No problem, Gabriel. Looks like I don't see any further questions in the chat about the ketubah. And the entire tractate of ketubah in the Talmud, if anyone ever gets a chance, I've actually learned that one a few times. So if anyone ever wants to set up a studying session just for that, we can go over the process of how marriage contracts evolved and the various things that they tie together. It's, if anyone ever tells you that the ketubah, that they don't want a prenup because the ketubah is a very sacred document, they don't want to ruin it, read a little bit ketubah. It is all just an economic issue. When you actually know the Aramaic and the ketubah, it's not such a mystical document. Let's see. Okay, one last person to cover. Remember back in the first class we had, if you were there with me, I promised to address what the Hasidim referred to in the book of Maccabees were like. We finally have a character who is able to depict such a person. This would be Honi the Circle Maker, who received opposition from Shimon ben Shetach. The story begins in Ta'anit. Let me go find that for you guys. So in the Mishnah, Ta'anit, it says, "It happened that all the people said to Honi the circle maker, 'Pray for the rain to fall.' There was a terrible drought in those days. He replied, 'Go and bring in the earthenware ovens used to roast the Pesach,' which is the lamb or the goat for Passover, 'so that they do not dissolve.' He prayed, and no rain fell. What did he do? He drew a circle and stood within it and exclaimed, 'Master of the universe, your children have turned to me because they believe me to be as a member of your household. I swear by your great name that I will not move from here until you have mercy on your children.' The rain began to drizzle. Thereupon exclaimed, 'It is not for this that I prayed, but for abundant rain to fill the cisterns, the ditches, and the caves.' The rain then began to come down with great force, whereupon he exclaimed, 'It is not for this that I prayed, but for rain of benevolence, blessing, and bounty.' The rain then fell in the normal way. Shimon ben Shetach sent him a message. 'Were you not Honi, I would have pronounced a ban against you. But what can I do? You act like a spoiled child before God, and yet he accedes to your request, just as a father accedes to the request of his spoiled son. It is you that Scripture states, "Let your father and your mother be glad, and let her that bore you rejoice." So, Shimon ben Shetach is concerned with people becoming overly reliant on miracles, when in the wake of such bloodshed following Yanai and the oppression of the Seleucids, it is evident that God often withholds such miracles even from the most righteous. As we recall, some of these pairs were even executed. Honi is seen, like Shimon HaSadik, the first character we addressed, as a remnant of the connection Israel once had with God, when miracles would happen and people wandering through the desert, finding water and food wherever they wanted. This tie is so important that many tales arise both of himself and his grandson in similar miraculous vein, even after the destruction of the temple. So from this we see that the Hasidim were simple pietists, unafraid of directly confronting their maker, but exceedingly humble in their own abilities when it came to the world around themselves. What is Honi? Yeah, Honi's a person. Do we have any questions about what's been discussed so far? What do you guys think about the weird relationship that Yanai had with the sages, back and forth between being a Sadducee? Think it was good for Yanai to be doing so many campaigns overseas? What about of Queen Salome Alexandra? Is the circle supposed to be that dividing line that separates the leader from the community so the leader will be able to communicate with God? Asked Gabriel. Interesting question. Well, we see in the prophetic tradition that often prophets do strange things as signs from God. And these were taken to be meant to be taken metaphorically, like the famous cases of a pot that fell over and the contents spilled out, which means like a great horde from the north will come forth and things like that. But these are usually in divine visions, or the prophet himself will be told by God to do these acts. Honi seems to be invoking that he wants no share in this world that God has created, that he will not leave this very spot that agrees with him and gives mercy to the people of Israel. That's what I get out of it. Particularly since Honi, being of the Hasidim, would not have necessarily been considered a leader, but more of like a preacher. Probably excessively strict with himself on legal matters and Jewish purity beyond the letter of the law. Gabriel says it almost sounds like some of the Native American rituals. Very true. Some spirit quests there would be certain tribes that would make circles out of cornmeal usually, and before entering and exiting, they'd usually purify themselves with tobacco or sage. And that was meant to be an experience of connecting with themselves and the spirit world. There's definitely parallels, I can see that. Do you guys think Shimon ben Shetach was actually a brother of the queen, or do you think it was more later conservative elements who were concerned with his relationship? Yeah, so the queen was real good at what she did. Yes, she is probably the one who helped push the sages coming to power in the Sanhedrin. Even though she appears a bit of a Hillary Clinton at first, he says. Yeah, she was kind of like the... Well, she and Yanai had an interesting relationship. Because remember, Yanai wasn't home very often. Though there was that Civil War period, and he would obviously meet foreigners. He very active in the Ptolemaic realm, and pretty often over killing Nabateans and enslaving them too. The Nabatean trade routes are very important, and if he didn't have to go through a middleman, then he would have direct access to the Arabian trade routes. And for the Ptolemies, this starts to deal with Rome. Rome's got some fingers going on over there, and so he was pretty actively involved in overseas issues. Shlomo ben Avraham says he doesn't think they're siblings. I actually tend to agree. Gabrielle says, well, I guess that the power that the queen had entitled her to be good. It's true, it could have entitled her, but remember, Yanai, people were against him, he just executed them. When the queen came into power, she could have executed all the Sadducees, because she was pro-Pharisee, yet she chose not to. She, apparently, she gave them a bunch of forts to control in return for their loss of power over the community as a whole. So she was a very good politician. No, sorry, Gabriel. I just now saw your other question concerning Honi as a preacher. He says, but would we not today consider the preachers also leaders that were the only ones who could supposedly communicate with God? It's a little bit different, because remember, there are the leaders of those times are kind of like the parliament. The sages are in the Sanhedrin. So it's different than how we see the leaders today. The Jewish community in the Second Temple period is not the Judaism as we know today. The Sanhedrin ran the legal arm, and the Hasmoneans had consolidated the power of the priesthood and the kingship, whereas previously the original setup was kind of priests ran the temple, the sages ran the legal enactments, and the king or queen, depending on the situation, ran the foreign affairs and wars and extra legal matters. So Honi was outside of all of these, may have been a member of the sages, but it's highly unlikely that he was a member of the Sanhedrin itself. It's probably more of just someone who truly believed in God, had a very strong faith, and because of this, God apparently gave him certain gifts. Gabriel says it sounded like a very political atmosphere, very political. In fact, I regularly refer to the Hasmonean period of Jewish rule as being the Jewish Game of Thrones, if anyone's familiar with that TV or book series. Says, thanks everyone for joining. Sorry, Adi. We'll see you next time then. Shalom. Any other questions from anyone? What about the interaction between Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shetach? Doesn't look like anybody has any more questions. How often do I do this kind of classes, Gabriel? We try to run it once a week. Currently, it looks like I'll be doing this on Tuesdays at the same time, hopefully. Each month, it kind of depends on what my schedule's like. Last month, I usually had Mondays off instead of Tuesdays, so it depends. Down below in the events, it will tell you what is upcoming. I'm not the only person who runs classes. Be sure to visit everyone else. Baby Leonia says you're completely lost. I can try to address anything that you're having issues with. I've only got a few more minutes, but I can answer any more questions. Also, please remember, OneShul is non-profit. If you enjoyed this class and you enjoy the other events that are hosted here, then please donate. Every little bit helps. It's unfortunately not free for us to be able to stream. Yep. Baby Lonia says, don't forget to donate $5 or any amount, really, whatever you're capable of. Gabriel says, who am I joining you now? You're welcome. Everyone's welcome at OneShul. Baby Leonia, was there anything that particularly confused you? You mentioned earlier that you were lost. And you tried to clarify anything that I spoke about. Gabriel, if you're asking about the donations, go scroll all the way up to the top. You'll see to the right of the OneShul name, it says donate. You have multiple options on how to provide your donation. Okay. Well, it doesn't look like there's any further questions. Again, thank you, everyone. You all very, very good questions asked, and it helps me keep track of where I am in the class to be able to answer these. Sometimes I might skip around or forget to mention something. Like when you guys started asking about the Queen, it reminded me to bring up that she actually gave a couple things to the Sadducees. Everyone has a good week, and I will see everyone hopefully next week. And currently, I think this will be on Tuesday, again at the same time. If that changes, it'll say in the events down below. Thank you, and shalom.